We are starting off our first conversation this morning trying to get as much information as possible about the phase out of single-use plastics. Joining us this morning, Maxine Monsanto, and she's the Environmental Officer for Environmental Law and Policy Unit at the Department of Environment. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. And so we saw the official launch of the campaign for the phase out of single-use plastic. And we know this proposal, when it was put forward, was very much celebrated in Belize. I think we can all say that in some of our environmental strategies, we've been very progressive and in fact ahead of the time for the region in being able to pursue some of these actions. So now it's approaching D-Day and understanding how we're going to do so, right?
Okay. Understanding how we're going to do so. Okay.
Yeah? Uh-huh. So one of the first things I wanted to clarify is that the April 22nd date that was set is not the day that we will stop seeing plastic in Belize.
No, it's not. It's the day, if the legislation is enacted, it's the day that we start the phase-out process. Mm-hmm. The draft legislation that was disseminated to the public through the website and sent to specific stakeholders basically had a phase-out process where it established proposed dates. To start off with a cutoff date for the importation in the legislation, the proposed date was the 1st of May. Then there was a stop date for production, which was the 1st of August. Then there was a stop date for sale, saying that after the 1st of November, you could no longer sell the product in country. And then there was a date when the government would start enforcing the legislation as it relates to possession, meaning you can no longer have the product for commercial purposes, which was the 1st of December. That is what is in the current draft legislation.
Okay, let's start off with some definitions. Single-use plastics, what will fall under that category?
Single-use plastic is actually a broad terminology.
Yes.
I found out yesterday in the launch that single-use plastics was actually the 2018 word of the year, according to Collins Dictionary.
Wow. Okay.
And single-use plastic, well, single-use was the word of the year. Single-use plastic actually refers to any plastic or plastic product that was designed for one-time use before it was before disposal, or it's recycled. Okay. So that's a broad statement, and a lot of things throughout the country cover single-use plastic.
Yes.
What the draft legislation proposed to look at was very specific single-use plastics under the Plastics Harmonized Code. See, this is why I told you.
That's
it's
really
going
technical.
into a technical statement.
You just tell us what will be included in our law.
Well, there are two lists, and it's a general thing. It's following the HS code. So there's a list for restricted, which are plastic products that will be allowed in through a permit for data collection, so we can track. So some examples of that are like plastic bottles, plastic pouches, the stuff that's used for packaging of food.
Okay.
Those will still be permitted in. It's just we need to keep a record and track them so we know how much is coming in, what sector is using it. And so then there's a prohibited list.
Okay, so just to understand more of the first list. So we're talking like the bottles that you get your water in or your ideals in, because you said plastic packaging.
Those are included in the HS code. Well, they're not specifically referred to. The HS code doesn't say water bottles.
Yeah.
The code says cling wrap or film wrap. It's an actual number. It's a 10-digit number. And so there's a list. It's in Schedule 1. And Schedule 2 is the prohibited list. Okay. So that list in the prohibited list is what's directed for the phase out. Schedule 1 is for the permits. It's restricted. It means that that product's still coming into country. It will still be used. It'll still be on the shelves.
So this is almost like drugs. Like, you know, there are certain drugs which are completely prohibited. You can't bring them in any at all. They shouldn't be here any at all. But there's some which can be used by the industry for specific purposes.
Yes. And we're not saying that we're limiting what you can use. We're simply putting it in place so that we can then develop policies later on in the future and identify. So as most Belizeans keep complaining about some of the items that are on the highways, in order to look at developing policies to address those, we need to first understand how much is actually coming in. Is it an actual problem? Where is it actually being used? And is it a possibility that it can be replaced.
Okay.
And to do that, we need the information that the proposed legislation will gather.
Yeah. So that first list, the restricted list, the ones that you will start to track and understand how much people are using. And I'm just trying to find examples where people can understand. So we know people make their own juice, and they do their cucumber mixes and whatnot, and they use it in a plastic bottle. All the water companies have a water bottle. If you're going to do an Ideal or whatever,
all of that will be in the permitted list.
that will be in the permitted, restricted.
It's a restricted
So
list.
now we'll have a track, so they
Yes.
can still continue their business.
They will still continue their business. It's just going to go through a permit.
Okay. Now let's talk about what eventually we no longer want to have or use in Belize.
The products that will be targeted specifically for the phase out, and that's listed in, let me get these schedules correct.
Okay.
Let's just get the schedules correct, because I don't want to tell someone, look at the schedule, and then you say, yeah, that's schedule 2. Those are single-use plastics, specifically the ones that we've been talking about, which are the styrofoam clamshells, the cups, the trays, the plates, the plastic shopping bags, the straws, the spoons, the cutlery, the plastic plates, the plastic cups. Those basically are targeted for phase out.
Okay.
The only way those products will be able to allow into the country if those products are categorized as biodegradable and they meet specific requirements to say that they're biodegradable.
I was looking at one of your slides. This single-use plastics also includes baby diapers.
No.
No?
The slide that you're referring to is one of the things that was launched at the media campaign. It's an educational campaign. What occurred yesterday was, okay, when the government gave the instruction on 20th March, they approved an implementation plan on 10th July of that same year. The implementation plan had 5 very cross-section outcomes to successfully implement the phase-out. Key to implement the phase-out was identified from the very beginning. It depends on you. It's the Belizean citizen. It's the general public. This, while the government can enforce, this change has to happen at the individual level with the individual person. So it was determined there needs to be serious education and sensitization to the public. So what happened was we came up with a campaign, which is Plastics Free Belize, Choose to Refuse. And what you are talking about, I don't know if they're going to show it on the screen.
So this is talking about how long it takes to break down.
how long it takes to break down one of the posters. And it was just telling you general facts, and it includes all the items that's for phase out, but it also highlighted something that people don't normally think about: disposable diapers.
Yeah.
There are cloth diapers available. We totally get the convenience of disposable diapers, but think about it. A disposable diaper takes 500 years. So when you finish with that disposable diaper that's for convenience purposes,
which
and we admit you absolutely need for some parents, when that leaves and it goes into the garbage container, if it reaches the landfill, that's 500 years it's sitting there. It also highlights that a plastic straw, which every Belizean seems to think is a norm, is 200 years. When you use that item, which is single-use plastic, it's a one-time use, because I don't know who reuses the plastic straws. When that gets thrown away, it's 200 years. The same thing for plastic cups, 450 years. The plastic bottles that you're talking about, the water bottles, 400 years. The longest item on this list is plastic utensils. Depending on the firmness of that utensil, it can be anywhere from 20 years to 1,000 years.
Wow.
And it won't degrade during what we keep telling people is, won't degrade during your lifetime, your children's life, and that thing will be here probably 10 generations down the road.
Now, looking at clearly, by this list alone, we see that plastic bottles and disposable diapers are really some of the critical ones. But there seems to have been some decisions made looking at the realities on the ground. One, the businesses, and 2, parents would perhaps really go up in arms if you say, we can't use...
I don't think anyone's targeting the disposable diapers. It's just highlighting to you to be conscious.
And so you made decisions to ensure that it wasn't extremely inconvenient by going entirely plastic free.
Well, the simple fact was that the targeted items were chosen because there were alternatives already there.
Yeah.
It was an easily replaceable item that can be replaced today, tomorrow. I have basically, I won't say in my life I've gone plastic free, but I no longer get plastic shopping bags because I carry my own reusable bag. When I get takeaway, I go, and you can check with the places that I buy from, they know I come with my container and I use that. So like I've eliminated as much as feasible the containers, the styrofoam food containers, the need for the coffee cup. I carry my own coffee cup, my own water bottle, because I basically just drink water from the tap or from a dispenser. So you can do, these are practical things that you can do now, that you can do in your daily life. And so those items were chosen for targeted. The other items, we identified there's a potential issue there, but we're not sure the scale of the issue. And additionally, there are not readily available alternatives right now in country. So for me to go and tell Bowen, I shouldn't say Bowen, but for me to go and tell the water bottling people or the juice bottling people, oh, guess what? You need to switch to biodegradable without laying out a framework, without giving them a platform. That's
so
impractical.
it wasn't, you don't have a viable alternative to that.
At this moment, there are research being done as to what can be done to replace these things. But what we do have is a clear understanding of the need to reduce your single-use packaging material. So you minimize the waste stream, you minimize the item, or you switch your production. But these are things that need to be determined down the line.
I'm here sitting looking at this pamper. I have a young child, so that one is sticking out for me. And the legislation you're saying does not cover or affect.
No, it won't affect that.
Diapers. But aren't we picking on the little guy? The plastic bottles, you have a scale here. I'm looking at the chart you just gave us. The Malik bags that we use, those are 20 years. Those are on the lower end of this chart that you have here. On the high end, the only one that stays around longer than diapers are the utensils.
It's not a matter of...
But yet there's no legislation to deal with either reducing it, affecting it.
So just out of curiosity, you want legislation to affect diapers?
No, all laws should be based on some policy. You're trying to deal with a problem, whether that problem be crime or it be order, whatever it is. And you're saying that single-use plastics are a problem. It is equivalent to saying, crimes are illegal, but manslaughter isn't illegal. One of the highest, most problematic things. Everything else really is illegal. But as it comes to manslaughter, it's pretty much legal.
Okay, let's get some things into perspective. The items that were targeted, we had numbers showing how much is coming into country. So like a plastic shopping bag, I think you'll see on this thing, it has here over 265 million pieces of single-use plastics coming in. What they did was they added up the statistics, the conservative numbers that we got for plastic shopping bags, styrofoam and plastic food containers, plastic cups, the plastic bottles, all of that, to say that as a country, for our population, 400,000 people, we bring in this. The shopping bags alone, imported, that's 200 million. 200 million shopping bags for a product that can easily be replaced by using a cloth bag, which I'm sure your grandmother used to use when she went to the supermarket.
I used to use
it.
I'm not that young.
You used to use it. So it's not a matter of picking on the little guy, as it is a matter of saying, these are things that we can do. These are items that we can change. Yes, it can be changed. Now the other items, like the disposable diapers, those, we are not targeting those specifically because they're not categorized that way, they're used for something else. We're looking at the items and their process of use and saying, okay, as you said, it's a low-hanging fruit, it's what we can change. Because what is actually required to phase out single-use plastic is a cultural change. It's a shift. And that's why the educational campaign was key. That's why the launch yesterday is key. It's to start promoting you, to start thinking about it. So now you know your disposable diaper is 500 years. You're going to start sitting there thinking, how can I shift that? What can I change? Do I have to still use it, or do I need to maybe make a couple of changes in the way I handle
don't
things?
reduce by leaving the child in it for longer, please. That's. But I want to move away from the diapers because it's focusing on something that's not a part of the legislation. And I understand why. You have to be sensitive to practicality and use in the society. But one of the main questions I think that's coming out from everyday persons is, how is this going to impact my food buying habits? So we know, we go anywhere and we buy a plate of food. I'm going to get a styrofoam plate or a clamshell within a plastic bag with plastic cutlery. So when I go to my barbecue stall or my rice and bean stall, or I go buy a soup, am I now going to get an added cost because my salesperson, the restaurant, has to purchase biodegradable products?
I can't answer that question, in all honesty. How they choose to address it, the vendor is how they choose to address it. I have spoken to some vendors who have basically said that, okay, we'll encourage you to bring your product, but if you want to use the products that we have, they may choose to do that. Other vendors have basically said that it's a matter of simply changing the way you think and what you use and what you carry with you to know how to do this. According to the partners on the task force, and there are like 10 partners on the task force, and many of them are trade oriented. They said that over time, the market is going to address the cost of these products, reducing it down, so that basically the costing will be negligible. In the beginning, there will be a shift. We're not denying that. In the beginning, there will be a shift. But realize that is currently there because right now, the biodegradable is competing against a product made from oil, which is basically so cheap you can just print it forever.
It's not only that,
as the shift moves, that is going to change entirely.
Maxine, isn't it the case that styrofoam products specifically falls within a particular gap in our legislation, that it qualifies as packaging material for manufacturers?
Yes.
And therefore pays, I don't know if it's no tax or low tax, so therefore it can be dirt cheap versus what the actual cost of importing a product like that is.
Yes.
So what we're saying is now we'll buy something that does have a tax, so there will be a cost implication. Is there any consideration for looking at perhaps incentivizing, reducing the taxes on importing these biodegradable products? Because essentially styrofoam wasn't competing fairly.
The Ministry of Trade is working on that, and that is like outcome 3 within the implementation plan. They are looking at addressing the issue of, as you are referring to, the duties on the biodegradable products and incentivizing that sector to ensure that the cost is competitive.
Now, when you're doing your consultations to put the legislation and the policy in place to deal with phasing out of plastics, I'm curious because as you look at all of these items, all of them have to do with something sanitary. And that's the excuse that we use for using them. Your styrofoam containers is a way to safely package food. Your straws are a way not to touch the rim of cups so that you avoid. What about the sanitary alternatives, and does it have any implications for persons who might say, listen, I'm not walking around with a, because I've seen now that in other countries there's
metal straws
and bamboo straws. Until the culture properly changes over where people are walking around with these kinds of sanitary items, is there a concern for the sanitary blowback? We
are in discussions with Ministry of Health. There is a component of the campaign that targets specifically the food vendors and the food vendors to show them the process and the ways to move forward with this initiative. So these are things that are being considered.
And in looking at probably some of the things that Belizeans would not necessarily think is covered under the legislation, how far does the campaign go in terms of identifying specific items that we might have in our house right now, which are single-use plastics that might fall on this, that we might no longer have available to us after the law is passed?
For that, I'm not exactly sure what you're referring to.
Well, that's the question. The question is really, is there anything that we might not necessarily be using in our house, might think that falls under this legislation, that when the legislation passed, we realize, man, I got me X no more?
Well, this is where I'm a bit confused, because the restricted list will not, the Belizeans won't, it will reach them through a trickle-down effect. This starts off at the importers and the manufacturers level. So the importer who brings in the product has a permit for most of the items. And seriously, literally nothing will change. The permit is simply, we're going to be collecting data. The prohibited list is where you're going to see that change, where you won't have that product anymore. And the items on the prohibited list are the ones that we repeat over and over, which are the plastic bags, the styrofoam containers, the plastic cups, the food. These are disposable items that, like, so if you go to a party, you know, when you go and you would say you're going to do your barbecue, you're going to have your Easter vacation coming up right now, and you're going to the store, and what's the first thing you put? Plates, forks, knives, the things that you just throw away quickly. Those are the items that, if they are made of plastic and styrofoam, come next year, if the legislation is passed, will be phased out and replaced by either biodegradable, or you as an individual can choose to go entirely reusable.
So those are the...
So while the product that you're referring to will no longer be here, it's not the same product. And the switch has already been made by a lot of restaurants and a lot of places. You just haven't been told, or you just haven't noticed. I mean, you will see the plastic bags that they're using has shifted. The containers that you're getting your food in has shifted. And the restaurants, the vendors, they just don't tell you. They've just basically done the shift already. For those who have been proactive. It's those who have not been proactive, as this process moves forward, they're going to have to shift.
No, I agree. We have seen, and I think particularly in those who come in contact with the tourism sector, have been proactive in taking the shift. I think the difference is that they have a reward that can come from promoting the fact that they are more green. I think the everyday vendors, as I mentioned, are perhaps the ones that I wanted to think about a bit. But as you said, we'll see what happens in terms of incentivizing biodegradable products for them to use for their consumers. But let's get into some of the specifics as to how this will work. When will we stop seeing? I know there's a proposed schedule being put forward, so you've put together a plan. Importers and manufacturers are being told after the schedule is approved, that they'll have a deadline. That we will no longer be able to go to a store and get a plastic bag.
There is right
and
now,
how do we get there?
Right now, the process is that today is the last day for comments. It's been out for 3 weeks for public comments and stakeholder, and we have been receiving comments. All the comments will be compiled. It will be presented to the Plastics Task Force. They're going to go through it to see the validity and determine, okay, can we make changes here? How should we strengthen the proposed legislation? So that's why I say the proposed dates, because you never know. They might decide different dates, but these are the dates right now being proposed. Once we have finished with that process and the document is finalized, it's forwarded to Cabinet for review, approval. Until they approve, and then it's signed into law, that's only when we can say, okay, these are final. It's not going to change. This is it. These are the dates that we're moving forward with.
Okay. So if we use the current proposed dates, how do you, I mean, I'm just trying to figure out, how do you go from importing over 265 million of a particular product, that people stop bringing it in, that there's no longer any in stock? I mean, how do you do, it's a phase out.
It's a six to 7 month, actually. 8 months, sorry. It's an 8-month phase out over that time period. The product will actually still be on the shelves well after the start date of the legislation.
Because they've already imported it.
Because they've already, it will stop. And that's the concept of the phase out. You are going to be allowed to finish out the stock that you have on hand. And once that stock is finished out, well, by that point, you can't import anymore legally. If it's still there, that means you're getting it in illegally. That's the idea of the phase out. And the same thing applies for production. Because the importation comes before the production, the simple fact is that means that you would have imported something. So we're giving the production facilities an opportunity to use the stock that they had. Now, they don't import, well, I shouldn't say don't, but during the consultations, they didn't import, the statements were that they don't import for the whole year in one shot. They import periodically. So it's allowing the time frame for the periodic operation for them to use out what they have, sell that product. And then there's a cutoff date for sale.
Somebody's going to come up though. I am sitting here thinking, if I'm an importer, all I will do, knowing it's going to be phased out, and I have the money, is to import a large number for the last amount.
The stockpile, that's why we've advised people not to stockpile, because yes, there's a cutoff date for importation, a cutoff date for production, but no, there is also a cutoff date for sale, which means that regardless of how much you have on that date, that is the last day you will be allowed to sell the product legally.
So your estimates are based on the consultations that they told you, how long it takes for them to deplete a stock.
Estimates are based on what they bring in, and basically, if they started stockpiling now, we were basing it on studies and consultations that was done before. So if you suddenly started bringing in 3, 4, 5 shipments of a product that you used to only bring in 1 shipment of the product, we're basing it on when you used to bring in the 1 shipment of the product.
Yeah.
So that's the concept besides the phase out time.
I imagine that importers and manufacturers are perhaps your biggest opponents to this phase out and eventually end of single-use plastics. What's the conversation that's happening there?
It's associated primarily, we're still receiving comments, but it's focused primarily on the permitting time, the processing time, and the dates.
The phase out?
The dates itself, yes.
Okay.
But in addition to the importers being one of the largest constituents, they also, if I were sitting at home watching this conversation, I'd be thinking that there is some, and this probably is not a question that you can answer, but thinking that the same persons who are probably affected by this, the big importers, are some of the big contributors to the politicians who are making the law. Mm-hmm. So they are right there saying, listen, there's an election coming 2020. You're going to come back to me, you're going to want money, and you're affecting something that if you multiply each by $1, you're looking at $265 million, and I'm sure it's more than $1 to import. How much of it are we sure that it's just not an opportunity for, and let me also put this in, it also, I think people would agree that there also is an opportunity here. The persons who are bringing biodegradable, the persons who are ahead of the curve bringing
a manufacturing
opportunity. Can you talk to us about, let me put it the positive way, what opportunities there are, and do we see new players on the market who are willing to take up the opportunity to get into biodegradable and to non-reusable, is that the proper term?
Reusable.
Reusable items.
Okay, let's go back to what was launched in the media, because one of the statements in here actually applies. I need to take off my glasses.
That's okay. We're getting serious now.
Yes. In all honesty, they have a statement in here that says economically there will be opportunities in Belize to meet the supply for reusable and biodegradable alternatives and will add value to Belize's greening brand. 2 things. 1, you said, okay, it works for tourism because they see a benefit.
Yeah.
It's going to work for the country on a whole because you can brand, right now we're branding the entire country as eco-friendly and green, but a tourist doesn't just stick with the tour company. Those overnight people, they go to the person on the street. They go to the restaurants there. Yeah. And once you're basically using biodegradable and reusable products within these places, it attracts a different clientele. That's 1. 2, regarding opportunities for investment, a lot of the raw products that are, I'm referring to it as raw products, but according to what traders explained to me, it's byproducts from the agricultural sector, just the bagasse, the corn starch, some of the other items are the raw materials, the inputs that are actually used for production of biodegradable products. So we have those items available in country. We're just not producing the biodegradable products. So one of the biggest pushes from their end isn't just to incentivize importers and the current existing group, but it should be to incentivize, I'm hoping, because you should really ask them this question, to incentivize new investors. And we do have potential new investors who have come in, but they've basically expressed that they're waiting to see whether the country actually does it. They're waiting to see if we're actually going to pass a law and say this is the route that we're going to take. Because like you said, right now the law is still there as a draft. And my goal at the Department of Environment, as the Environmental Law and Policy, is to put everything in place, complete all the consultations, set the framework, and have the draft ready for signature. At that point, the decision is with those who actually sign the document, those who actually review and enact laws.
Yeah. But the way it's been heralded, it's almost that there's complete buy-in.
Yeah.
You had a launch with the minister himself.
Yes,
yesterday.
the minister himself. And he is very much for, in his statement, he highlighted the government's commitment and their determination to move forward with this activity. It's just the process that needs to be finalized.
Mm-hmm. Now, for people at home, tell us why this is an important priority for Department of Environment.
It's an important priority for the Department of Environment because we do environmental strategies. On a whole, this is a protection for human health as well as environment. Styrofoam and plastic leach into our food, they leach into our environment. I mean, you guys drive the highway, you saw all the burning that's been happening. Mm-hmm. A lot of this burning starts off with someone doing open yard burning in their backyard and they're burning plastics. You are basically breathing in toxins that affect your health. These items end up in our environment and then make their way slowly but surely into our food chain. Studies have come out in the last 3-4 years which show that fish are eating the plastic. We eat the fish. They're ending up in birds. They're polluting everywhere. One of the biggest things you can see, which you started noticing, was Belize City Council had a cleanup where they were cleaning the drains and the canals. Why? Because the plastic then ends up clogging this thing and you have flooding, consistent flooding. So for us, from an environmental standpoint, it's important. It's a pollution control measure as well. Because if we reduce the waste, that means less that we need to worry about economically and less that ends up on the landfill, so the landfill can last longer.
So there's two parts to this campaign. One is working on a policy and legislative level, but then they're also trying to get Belizeans to change our behavior.
That's going to be a slow process.
That's the biggest challenge we face in most of our problems. But I have to say, you know, it's trending internationally, and we're good at buying into trends. You know, and so I do have to say it because we do know that sometimes when something becomes very popular, it's a lot easier for us to buy into it. So the big push is having individuals make that shift themselves.
Yes.
Tell us how and tell us why.
How the individual can make
Yeah,
them shift
how
themselves?
Kevin walks out of here and has a different perspective on the plastic that he uses.
Well, I think he's already had a different perspective looking at the poster and
he's
the
a
amount
stubborn
of
one,
years.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that the education campaign is supposed to do. It's supposed to get you to start thinking and realizing the things that we have been using for convenience over the last 30 years. Oh yeah, it's a good thing for convenience, but the long-term benefits, or rather the long-term negatives of these things, they don't work in your favor. And the shift, the change, it's not that difficult. I mean, carrying around your own reusable bag.
Yeah.
One of the ads, I think you will see if they've played
with
it.
the guy who pulls it out and says, I have
It fits
mine.
in the back of your pocket.
Yeah.
So you can literally, you keep it in your car, keep it in your school bag, in your purse. I mean, women carry around tons of stuff in their purse. A little bag that you can open up.
Yeah. No, they make them so convenient now. They're foldable into a little pouch. So they're those to replace the plastic use. What are some of the other things that we can do to reduce?
Okay, I walk around with my coffee. I bought a reusable coffee container for those of us who like to drink caffeine or tea. You have, and you can personalize.
So let me ask you a question. When you go to the coffee shop, do they fill the traveling bag?
Yeah.
There's an incentive. That's almost double.
Depending on who I go to, they're used to, I walk in, if I've been drinking coffee all day and I say, okay, I want this, but you need to and they wash it out for me and then they refill it back and give me back my coffee. Okay. And there's some shops that actually give you a discount if you bring your reusable coffee.
Oh, nice.
And it's not just a coffee mug. I have one for cold drinks as well if I know in that day I want to do that, or I keep them in different places. You can go reusable. There are several schools. We will be highlighting them as this promotion continues, this educational continues, that have basically gone plastic and styrofoam free for lunch. And so the kids bring their containers with them in their bag and they go to the counter with that container. It's starting it from young, encouraging you to do that. And as I said, the alternative is biodegradable. It's our hope that more biodegradable comes in, the price goes down, and that Belize starts producing its own biodegradable to not just used locally, but to ship to Mexico, to Guatemala, and to the Caribbean region, who, by the way, is also looking to go this route.
I was looking at a video that was talking about reusable items made from cassava. You can't tell the difference at all. It's just you can put it in water and stir it after a while. But I want to go back to a little to the whole conversation about culture and about the education campaign, because I think that is where the battleground is. Yes, I agree, Belizeans, we like trends. You know, whether it's skinny jeans or it's a, or it's Uber.
We agree on something.
We have Uber.
It'll come.
Really?
Yeah, it's called the Dalavan. You know, it's the illegal taxis on the side of the road. But there are two things that this really creates a problem for Belizeans, to my mind. One is that Belizeans like convenience, and they like cheap. And although we use very diplomatic terms like it has a value and a benefit, things, for the short term at least, will become more expensive. So if you go and you buy, for example, don't have the exact figures, if you go and buy a plate of food for $8, now it could possibly go to $8.50 or $8.75 or $9.
Because it's plastic, styrofoam, and
we see what they do with gasoline. When you catch a taxi after price go up by 50 cents a gas, surely business places...
Well, it does identify a regulation issue too that perhaps has to be looked at, and I don't know who, I mean, that would probably be Bureau. No, I'm just going to say, it's probably...
Bureau standards maybe.
Yeah.
But how do we, because that's really the issue, how do we tell Belizeans this is a better thing? You're going to get more your iced tea when you go to Moon Clusters, you're going to get more when you go here. I've seen really on the food store right up the street here, the Pits, where somebody went and got a container, and I thought, man, that's more food than I was getting in my little styrofoam thing. Belizeans very big. But how do we cross that threshold to let Belizeans pass the two most important things to us, which is convenience and cost?
Okay, you take your containers to the store, you're not going to get more. I'm going to be perfectly honest. I take my containers, they portion out the food. Any restaurant who doesn't do that,
she'd say.
I have no idea how they're making their money.
No, stateside measures, trust me.
Yeah, they measure. Yeah. They portion out the food. So you will get the same portion. The only thing is you might get less if you bring a smaller container. But that's one. Two, you said it yourself. In the short term, it's going to be a cost. There will be transition pains. We're not denying that. We are fully aware that that's going to happen. One of the reasons is because, as you said, there is pushback. And some people thought we weren't going to get to this stage. Government made an announcement, but are we really going to do it? And that's also what the investors were waiting to see. Are you really going to do it? So until the day that legislation is passed, it's still a question of, are you really going to do it?
Yeah.
But at the Department of Environment, the minister made it very clear, yes, we are going to do it. This is going to happen. It's just how it happens. And that little transition pain, which you said yourself is short term, yes. It won't be a long pain. It's not going to be a continued process, because people like to earn money. This is business. If the thing that you used to have isn't there, somebody is going to fill that gap, and they're going to start. You're going to see a lot more, and people who fills the market first, which brand you like best, it's going to happen. I mean, this is not necessarily a trend rather than a complete shift. And it's a shift that we're asking you to do with a potential for greater economic benefit. The long term in it is greater benefit.
Okay.
Can I ask one final question, which is, I know we're completely out of time, but I want to ask this one. The Ministry of Environment is, to me, one of the most proactive and productive departments. Whether or not I've seen your commercials on TV, I've seen your litigation, the recent case that's right before the courts right now. And so the minister has to take some credit, and the ministry has to take some credit in terms of the work that they're doing. My question is, in terms of the list of environmental issues that this country has, single-use plastics might not necessarily be number one in terms of some of the issues that we're having. For the cynics out there that say, you know, why is it that if there's a list of environmental issues that we have, that single-use plastic is not necessarily number one. Why is this taking the forefront, and why is there a lot of work being put into this area? How do you respond to that?
Actually, the word single-use plastic may not be number one, but the word marine pollution is all the way up there. There is an environmental policy and strategy. We do one every 10 years, and we have an action plan every 5 years. If you go through that document that was done in 2014, you will see that there is a section under it called a clean Belize, and there is a portion called a green Belize. A green Belize highlights a priority as transitioning to a circular economy. Now, going through the technical explanation of what a circular economy is, it's waste reduction. It's basically taking a product from the time it's been designed, created, and saying that you will address the recycling and the waste of that product the entire way all around to the point of disposal, and it comes back. Yeah. So you reduce waste. The reality is that to get to that stage, we need the data that's going to be collected from the licensing, from the permitting system. To reduce the waste, one of the biggest wastes that we see is the packaging material from single-use plastic. Yeah. So what I point out to people is, while you don't see the actual word, that is actually priority number one. And it does address clean Belize and a protection of the marine environment.
All right.
Awesome.
Well, thank you very much for coming in. We appreciate you explaining how the proposal is for us to move forward. And there is definitely work in terms of the department side and the policy side, but also for us individually as citizens of this country.
Thank you for having me.
We're going to go ahead and take a break. When we come back, we'll be talking to the Ministry of Health about World Tuberculosis Day.